Okay, so hopefully what you went over with the sub is done well. Regardless, we are gonna move on. Chapter 9, again, the focus of chapter 9 is looking at how indigenous people were impacted by, let's say, imperial or colonial policies in Canada. Residential schools being one of the main and primary cases for that. Here's just an example. Now, one thing to keep in mind with residential schools is that they were ongoing for over 100 years, which means that the people running and operating them changed. There was many schools, which means that not all of them functioned the same. I say that to say that it's not clear to me whether or not every school was run in this manner, if every individual or a group of individuals experienced physical, sexual, emotional, or psychological abuse of whatever form. Okay. It's also entirely possible that one school at its start was run very poorly because of whatever philosophy they were applying at that school, whoever was running it. And as time went on, 50, 60, 75 years, they might have completely re-envisioned what they were doing at the school. Okay, so it's not clear to me. My guess would be that not every school was terrible for all 125, 150 years that they were in use. Okay, but some punishments, I would love to get some sources on this. This is a very old slideshow of mine, but failing a test, no food for a day. That'd be some of y'all. For not working hard enough. Who do you think gets determined that? Imagine if I determined you weren't working hard enough. And I grabbed, what should I grab? No, ruler's too light. You kids need my belt. Yes, my belt, leather belt. Give you like 10 lashes. What do you think? 10 lashes for not working hard enough. How many of you always forget to bring a pencil? 20 lashes. Getting whipped with a stick or a belt. Rude and disorderly conduct. That's like half of y'all.
Well, they do it really hard.
Okay. We gotta modernize this. We don't use sticks anymore. How about we just take a chair?
We use chairs.
They use chair back then. Yeah. Garden work. We're gonna go make you work out in the field. Just walk around behind the camera. So obviously, looking at some of these punishments, you can imagine that for many children at that time, going to school was probably a very violent experience, probably not enjoyable. Unfortunately for them, many of them had no choice. They were in those schools for 8 to 10 months, maybe 12 months out of the year. For those of you wondering, there are 12 months in a year, so some of them might not have gone home for long periods of time to see their family. Which, as this video is emphasizing, if you remove a person's ability to speak their cultural language, you kind of sever their tie to their culture, right? So imagine you go to school, you start school, kindergarten, you're how old, like 5, 6? Let's say they start whooping you for speaking in English and instead they teach you Japanese, let's say, off the top of my head, okay? So now how old are you kids, 15? Now you're 14, 15, 16. You don't speak any English, you only speak Japanese. How are you supposed to communicate with your parents who speak English? You don't. How do you connect with your culture if you don't speak that language? You don't. So a lot of the let's say, the administration of these schools was done either through the government or various churches. It was a combined effort. The sentiment expressed might have been to civilize this group of people, to give them, this modern culture that the Europeans were bringing, which was not nomadic. It was not hunter-gatherer. They would remain in one area. They would grow their food. They would sell it. They would try to earn money rather than trade things. Girls, let's quiet down. Okay, some might argue that that's a British way of life, okay, or European. But as we did discuss in the previous chapter, many of those treaties were signed by chiefs who wanted opportunities for members of their tribe to be able to adapt to this new culture that was taking over. Okay. So this history is rather complicated, and I would always juxtapose it with what happened in America. And what happened in America was typically just slaughter. Okay. There are not a lot of treaties. From my understanding, there's not a lot of treaties signed between the indigenous groups in America and the indigenous groups in America and the American government. I know there's a lot of massacres. One of the worst massacres in American history was done from the American government onto indigenous peoples. Here is a poem by a Mi'kmaq poet. It goes, I lost my talk, the talk you took away when I was a little girl at Shubenacadie school. You snatched it away, I speak like you, I think like you, I create like you. The scrambled ballad about my word. 2 ways I talk, both ways I say. Your way is more powerful. So gently I offer my hand and ask, let me find my talk so I can teach you about me. How many of you know a second language? A handful of us. Okay. For those of you who speak a second language or are aware, you might have observed that the way you phrase things can be very different in different languages, right? Where you put the subject and the adjective, whatever, how you position the language can be very different, which can make it can make it very difficult for people who are trying to learn English because it's structured very different. And how you relay information changes as well. Not all languages write from the left side of the page going to the right. Arabic is the opposite. So in Arabic, the start of the sentence is on the right side of the page and it goes to the left. Right? So changing the way people speak, communicate, and engage with one another can have a dramatic impact on how they see the world, right? Like the way you think and the way you create, which can be hard to understand if you don't speak another language, if you haven't had a lot of experience with other languages. Much of the challenge, so this would be, legacies of historical globalization here, legacies of imperialism and colonization. Much of the challenge for indigenous people today, particularly for those who have parents or grandparents who went through a residential school system, is that when you are taken from a young age, taken away from your home, and put somewhere where you are beat, which one of you would like to move? Between you two, who's gonna move? Okay, you're gonna go, since you're looking, you're gonna go back there. All the way at the back. Take your stuff with you. Yeah, if you are regularly beat, not allowed to speak your own language, not allowed to go home and visit your family, it's going to present a variety of challenges for how to be a functioning human being. People struggle with that enough as is, let alone, without the addition of abuse. all forms of that type of abuse. So feel free to skim through those quotes. Okay, and then that just tends to extend, right? So if you have parents, like let's say you go through a terribly traumatic experience over several years, right? It's not like, you know, they went to a battle and it was terrible because they saw people die. It was an everyday experience for many people over several years, perhaps. Not being able to unpack and unwind what happened to them so that they can properly function. Let's say they have children. Well, they're not going to be available for their children 100%, let's say. Right? I mean, some of you probably have a lot of challenges with your parents as well. And it's unlikely your parents, you know, got beat over the head with a stick or over the back with a stick repeatedly for, you know, the variety of things we saw. So this cycle just continues, and you know, it's very easy to say, well, somebody has to fix it at some point. Someone has to, in their family, take responsibility and accountability and, you know, fix their lives. But that can be incredibly challenging. It's not that I disagree with that point of view. It's just that it's incredibly challenging, especially if you don't have the tools to succeed. Particularly if your environment around you is set up in a manner that doesn't support success or taking care of yourself, right? So do you think someone who has who struggles with alcohol abuse